Are there bookshops in Nigeria?
When Western journalists come off as disrespectful, some African leaders don't hesitate to set the record straight. In this video, we're highlighting powerful moments when African leaders responded to biased questions with calm but firm responses, demanding respect and fair treatment. Let's dive into these unforgettable exchanges. Paul Kagame. Paul Kagame addresses the controversial issue of international legal accountability, particularly regarding France's actions related to Rwanda. He critiques a French judge's decision to indict several leaders from different countries for alleged crimes linked to the Rwandan genocide. Kagame argues that this indictment is one-sided and stems from a flawed historical narrative that ignores France's own involvement in the events of a genocide. Kagame highlights the concept of universal jurisdiction, which allows judges in one country to prosecute individuals from another for serious crimes. He questions why this principle seems to apply selectively, allowing French judges to act against foreign leaders while denying Rwanda the right to prosecute individuals in France for their actions during the genocide. He emphasizes the need for fairness and reciprocity in legal matters, asserting that if French judges can indict leaders from Rwanda, then Rwandan judges should have the same authority to hold French individuals accountable for their alleged crimes in Rwanda. Kagame firmly rejects any attempts to prosecute Rwandan leaders without allowing Rwanda to pursue justice for its own citizens.
For example, the case in France, a judge somewhere in rural areas of France, one of the village judges somewhere, decides that he's going to indict leaders in Rwanda and talks about all kinds of things that happened in Rwanda and, blames Rwandans for. At the same time, there is a bad history between us where actually during the genocide, there are many things that happened that involved some people from France. So now, instead of actually Rwanda having a case against France, a judge in France indicts leaders of a country, military leaders, political leaders, a whole list of about close to 20. And they want to indict them to France to be tried for things that they say they did, which are also completely fabricated. But because of that bad history we have had, they wanted to do that. And we said, this is not possible. We said, if you are doing that, and they called it universal jurisdiction that give the powers to these judges. And we said, okay, if actually your judges have powers to do that, to indict people in Rwanda or elsewhere and take them to the courts in France, if it is universal, then our judges should have the authority to actually indict your people and bring them to the courts of law. So the question therefore was, how does it become universal when it is just one way? So this was the whole process. In fact, it was the same case with the one I mentioned of Spain, which you have since, on the same basis of argument, actually we have resolved this one. The one with France is still outstanding, and we have said, no way, you are not going to try anybody from here unless we try those who have cases against actually that were committed here. In fact, the people they want to try in Rwanda are not said to have committed crimes in France. They are accusing them of committing crimes in Rwanda. So how about those of your country that actually committed crimes in my own country that you don't allow me to try?
Chimamanda Adichie. In this interview, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie responds to a racially charged question about whether Nigeria has bookstores. She expresses her frustration over the underlying assumptions that people have about Africa, particularly the stereotype that the continent lacks basic cultural institutions like bookstores. Adichie emphasizes that Nigeria does indeed have bookstores and a vibrant literary scene filled with authors, readers, and diverse stories. She argues that such questions reflect a limited understanding of Africa, often perpetuated by Western media and narratives that focus only on poverty or conflict. Adichie advocates for a broader perspective that acknowledges the richness and complexity of African life. She encourages people to engage with African literature and culture to gain a deeper appreciation of its contributions to the global narrative. By sharing her own experiences, Adichie hopes to challenge stereotypes and promote a more nuanced view of Nigeria and Africa as a whole.
Are there bookshops in Nigeria?
You know, I think it reflects very poorly on French people that you have to ask me that question. I really do. Because, I think surely, it's 2018, come on. My books are read in Nigeria. They're studied in schools, actually not just Nigeria, across the continent of Africa. And it means a lot to me because obviously I'm very grateful to be read everywhere in the world, but there's something about being read by the people about whom you write. And some of my writing, there are people who've sort of made stage plays of some of the stories in Nigeria. When I wrote Half of a Yellow Sun, I remember doing my first event in Lagos, and it was a full house, and it suddenly turned into people just arguing about history. And I sat back and I just enjoyed it. So people were throwing words at each other. And for me, what was wonderful was that literature had made this happen, that because of this contested part of our history, people had read this book, and suddenly they were talking about it and they were disagreeing. But the point is that we're having a conversation, and that conversation had been prompted by literature. And so I felt hopeful about it. I think in general that France doesn't seem to realize that it is no longer an 18th century world power. And I say this with sad honesty because I have affection for. Oh, the minister left. Oh, okay, good. But I think that the French. So I'm Anglophone African. I'm not Francophone. But I think that French. The history of French and Francophone relations, I find very vexed and troubling. I think it's interesting, this idea that the CFA, the Francophone currency, is somehow tied to the French franc. I find that really retrograde. I think that the way that there's a kind of cultural power that France wields over Francophone Africa that I think is unhealthy. I think Francophone films are really French films in a way that's not the case in Anglophone West Africa. There is a kind of, I think the way that Anglophone Africans occupy their space in the UK is not the same way that Francophone Africans occupy their space in France. And, and I think that Francophone Africans who know this, right? And maybe they should be the ones answering this question because, I know I read a bit about it, but I obviously I don't have a personal experience. But I should say that my criticism when I started out, and I stand by it, it's because I've had many unpleasant experiences with French immigration. yesterday was different because they were actually polite. But every time I have come into France, and it's happened, I'm going to say 4 or 5 times in the past 2 years, there is a kind of contempt with which I am dealt with when I present my Nigerian passport that I really find indefensible. And I think it's important because the immigration officers are the first line of contact with the country, and so it shapes the way you think of a country. And I think it takes very little to be polite and to give people their basic dignity. And if I'm coming into a country and I have everything I need and I am legally there, then surely there's no reason to keep me for 30 minutes asking me ridiculous questions, ignoring me for long periods, and just being an ass. So that's what has shaped my irritation with, I think it's important to remember that all human beings really deserve equal dignity. It shouldn't depend on the passport that we carry.
Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. She discusses the urgent challenges facing Liberia after years of conflict. She emphasizes the high risk of returning to war if the government and international community don't act decisively and consistently. When she took office, Liberia lacked basic services like electricity and water, with schools and roads in disrepair. However, by July, they managed to restore electricity and water to parts of the capital, Monrovia, for the first time in 15 years. Sirleaf warns that if international support doesn't increase quickly, Liberia may miss its best opportunity for lasting peace and development. She highlights the resilience of Liberians, who simply desire peace, education, and the ability to provide for their families, aspirations that should not be too much to ask for. She underscores the importance of poverty reduction as a way to prevent conflict and foster sustainable development. Central to this effort is education, as a high illiteracy rate hampers progress. Sirleaf believes Liberia can transform from a country plagued by mismanagement to one filled with hope and promise, focusing on rebuilding and empowering its citizens.
The risks of regression to war in post-conflict societies is high when the government and the international community are not able to make strong efforts at key moments and sustain them over time. When we took office, there was no electricity and no water. Schools and clinics have crumbled. Roads were impassable. Institution of governance had completely collapsed. In July of this year, we were able to turn on electricity and water to parts of our capital city, Monrovia, for the first time in 15 years. But time is pressing. Or if our international partners wait too long to ramp up its support, then we may lose the best chance Liberia has had in a generation to end the conflict permanently and build the foundations for growth and prosperity. We cannot afford to let that happen. Liberians are a resilient people. They just want the simple things that most people take for granted: to live their lives in peace, get a good education, to be able to provide for their families. These things are not too much for Liberians to dream about. Poverty reduction strategies are at the core of both averting a return to conflict and establishing the foundation for sustained development. We are placing emphasis on empowering the people, especially the poor and vulnerable, to become participants in a development process. Education is central to renewal and reconciliation. No nation can develop under conditions of a 70% illiteracy rate. Liberia is not a poor country. but a country that has been poorly managed. We are committed to change this, to pursue those goals that will move us from the crisis of the past to the opportunity of the present. We are committed as a people to build a new Liberia from the ashes of an old, turbulent past to a future of hope and promise. Thank you.
Let us know in the comment section what you think of the video. That wraps up the video for today, guys. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to Insight TV, leave a thumbs up, and of course share the video. Until the next time, see you in the next video.